Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this little guy right here. This is the Apple Watch Series 7. First off, though, I want to thank my Patreon patrons who make the channel possible and make it possible for me to pick up random things like this because I think it'd be interesting content. Next thing, I know what you're thinking, Nick, oh my god, a smartwatch, really? Well, those of you who know the channel know that I generally talk about actual wristwatches, right? Like, you know, quartz, mechanical, that kind of thing, from the everyday carry perspective. And the thing is, increasingly, more and more people are wearing these kinds of watches. And the Apple Watch is the most popular of them by a pretty good margin, at least in the people around me on a regular basis. And so I figured, you know what? It's always worth asking, am I missing something? Is this a piece of gear that's going to change my life? Is this going to get me out of watches? I hope so, but we'll find out. Right? So that's why I'm doing this. That's why it's interesting to me. Next thing, let's do some size measurement here. This is a 41mm watch, and nominally, so is this. But we're going to notice that actually these are very different watches dimension-wise. This guy comes in here on this dimension around 35mm, and on this dimension, measuring just the watch itself, we're coming in closer to 39mm. Lug-to-lug distance, which is more important for people with smaller wrists, coming in around 43. The thickness of this guy is considerable, but it's actually less than you would think. It's 12.5mm. The thing is, it's got this little protuberance down here, and this protuberance is designed to do a bunch of measurement, right? This is doing your pulse oximetry and all that kind of stuff. And so as a result, that kind of sits down, pressed into your wrist, so you only really get this part sticking up above. So there is that, and those are kind of the most important measurements. Next thing, this guy is the Apple Watch Series 7. It is the latest and greatest version from Apple, released here recently, and it is aggressively wanting to lock itself, and that is, by the way, not my passcode in real life, in case you're thinking, oh my god, he's got the same thing I use on my luggage, right? No, it's a slightly different thing. But I have used smartwatches before. In fact, I've had an Apple Watch before, way back when I used a Pebble Steel, and it was great. It was the best watch I had owned for a long, long time. But at that moment, I had a lot of notifications that I really couldn't miss. It was very important to me, and there were a lot of calls I was getting where I maybe couldn't call back, right? And so that was important. At that moment, I needed something like that. But later on, I decided to try, you know, a more regular watch, and I kind of fell in love. And I kind of fell out of love with the smartwatch thing. But at some level, the Apple Watch at the time wasn't great. There were a lot of downsides to it. It felt like a lot of compromise. And so I figured, let me try again. Let me see what's going on here. How is this watch actually relative to a regular watch? What are the things that it brings to the table now? Is this going to finally be the thing that, you know, pulls me out of the watch world? That would be great. So I decided to pick one of these guys up. This is the 41mm version. It is in midnight black, and it is the non-cellular version because I don't need yet another phone bill in my life. But the question I'm going to ask here is not like, what are all of the features of the Apple Watch? Because that's a big, big question here. Instead, I want to tell you not what everything that this can do is. Apple can tell you that, but instead to give a real-world discussion about how this worked in my life, right? And yes, by the way, Android fanboys, I did go Apple Watch, and I do generally use Apple devices. Apple angers me on a regular basis, right? I'm not a huge fan, but this is going to be the best choice, both because I think a lot of people are really interested more in this than some of the other ones, and because it works better with my devices. I don't need to hear, oh my god, Apple is suck, down in the keyboard or in the comment section. We can pass on that one. Feel free to weigh in on the topic, but, you know, we don't need the culture war, so to speak, down there. So anyways, what we're going to do here is talk about the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly, as always, of this very interesting, very strange little watch. So on the good side, to start with, the Milanese loop bracelet, which is what this guy is currently wearing, is actually a very, very nice bracelet. I'll kind of unmount it from the watch, which will also show you, by the way, how this guy mounts to the watch. What you can see here is it's got these end links that are effectively, they slide into these little gaps here in the watch, and then you can engage and disengage them using these little buttons here on the back. But the Milanese loop bracelet is actually quite good. I didn't think I was going to like this, but I really do, because it's got a magnetic closure. This whole thing is vaguely magnetic, but once you kind of get it on there, it is pretty secure. There was really no risk of this coming off. And in fact, I would very much like to find a strap like this for regular watches. I think that would be quite interesting and quite entertaining. This is a much nicer watch strap than I kind of expected, and in many ways, it's probably my favorite part of the watch. This is a very, very nice approach. There are other strap options too. I also picked up this little guy. This is the Solo Loop, and it has a lot of stretch to it. And you put it on there, and there's no clasp or anything, so you have to buy the proper size. And I ended up doing the size 5 here. But nonetheless, it's very good. It's a little bit on the kiddie side, especially given that you can't buy one in black. But nonetheless, there's also a leather loop product that works a lot like the Milanese loop with a series of magnets in there. That's a cool product, not my style, but it's very cool. And they got a bunch of other stuff out there. But it is nice to see that variety, albeit with some weird holes in the color selection. But anyway, so I mostly wore this on Milanese loop, tried this briefly and decided, nah, it's not me. Yeah, it's not my approach. So anyways, there's that. Next thing, one thing that's important is that, or one thing that's good about a smartwatch, and maybe the best thing about a smartwatch, is that it can give you notifications, right? If you are in a position where you really cannot miss a call, this guy will help. If you get a new text message come in, you will see a little notification. You will feel what really does feel like a tap on your wrist saying, you know, hey, somebody's, texting you here. This can be very, very useful. It also gives very subtle but noticeable alarms, right? All of this can be done very, very silently. You can make it use sound, but this gives you something where, for instance, if you're a person who regularly leaves your desk on your, leaves your phone on your desk, you might actually want to use something like this just so you keep getting those notifications, if that's something that's important to you. So that is a very nice thing about it. It also offers silent alarms in the morning, which is a very, very nice thing, right? Where you wake up because, your watch is kind of going thump, 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 thump on your wrist, rather than because your phone is screaming at you, right? And especially if one person in your household wakes up a lot earlier than another one, this can be a nicer way to keep the peace, and can be very nice. Also, things just like easy timers, right? Because you can set timers with this guy and then have it go off in 2 minutes, and it'll just get like, and that'll be a good reminder to you take your phone, or take the tea bag out or something like that, however you want to roll. So there's that. You also get very nice bonuses being in the Apple ecosystem with this guy. For instance, if you're playing a sound or playing an audio something or a YouTube something, you can actually, it'll pull up a special screen that allows you to, forward, back, etc. Even if you're playing that on your phone, and you can also use the little digital crown guy here, which does rotate as well as press. There's also this button over here. You can use that button, and of course, it just locked itself. Thank you very much, Apple Watch. But anyways, you can use this little crown to increase and decrease the volume. That's really nice, and especially when your phone is in your pocket because you are, walking down the street or something, that can be a lot more subtle. That can be nice. Next thing, it also, there are other things that you can do with the ecosystem, by the way, as well. I mean, right now, I've got it linked to a phone, but you can also have it done such that you can use your Apple Watch to unlock your laptop if it's an Apple computer. Whatever. I guess that works. That's okay. Next thing that I really did appreciate about this guy, and that is very, very important right now. Let's say that you are wearing a mask, whether that is a Batman mask or otherwise. It can occasionally be very useful. I just put this guy on backwards. It can be very useful. Unfortunately, Apple made a very bad choice, I think, in going away from Touch ID. It used to be fingerprint-based identification. Now it tries to recognize your face. Did I just put that on the wrong way again? Yes, I sure did. But anyways, this is not a great system in and of itself, but it's a really bad system in a world where you're wearing a mask, whether it's a Batman one or otherwise, because, unfortunately, it can't see your face and confirm who you are. And so as a result, iPhone users have now been forced into authenticating with a passcode over and over again in their daily life if they're going around wearing a mask. And so they are now able to, if you're wearing one of these guys and it's been on your wrist contiguously, it can unlock your phone, right? And you get a little notification every time it does that, so you can immediately say, no, that's not me, and lock your phone back up. But still, it's a nice little detail there. And it is something that I will miss going, leaving this guy behind, right? I think that is a very, very nice thing. It makes Face ID much less bad right now. Another thing that I appreciate about this guy is that you can actually, if you're out at a store or something like that, and the thing's unlocked, if you double tap this button right here, it will open up Apple Pay. And in a lot of places, at least out here in the California, you can hold your device up to the credit card reader and it will immediately pay for things, and you don't have to sign anything, you don't have to touch anything, you don't have to get anything out of your wallet. It's really, really nice. And even some vending machines use that. Increasingly, gas pumps have been using that, need to start using it. Guys, come on. But anyways, that's another really nice feature for this guy, right? You don't have to get your wallet out. You can just pay with your wrist. That's kind of cool. Next thing, this is generally a very lightweight watch. I'm going to get out my little scale here, and we're going to see that configured for my wrist, which is around 6.25 inches. This guy is going to weigh in at a very, very slight 2.29 ounces. Compared to this full steel Omega that I've been wearing for the, time before it, what we're going to see is this guy comes in at 4.97 ounces. This is a much, much lighter thing. If you want heavier, you can always get the steel version, but I like the lightweight a lot, and I think it makes it a lot more secure on this Milanese loop bracelet here. So I think that works well. Next thing, this has an always-on display, and I'm going to put this on my wrist here so that it'll actually stay locked and stay unlocked for a second and show this off. Getting this onto my wrist is not necessarily straightforward. So you pull it through and then kind of yank and then slip that down the other side there. And once I unlock the bad boy, what we're going to see here is that this will just stay on. And if I kind of roll my wrist away, after a little while, it's going to kind of give up, and you're going to see the second hand is going to disappear, as well as the everything's going to go a little darker here. Let's wait for it, see if it happens. Maybe it won't. Just, oh, there it went. So right now, the watch is still on. It is still visible. The hands are visible. I can still see what's going on. I still get notifications and things like that. But if I rotate it back towards me, you're going to see the hand comes back, everything updates again. So what this means is that at a glance, even if your hand is just in your lap or something like that, is sitting on a desk during a meeting, you can still glance over and see the time. And that is one of the very best things about wearing a watch, is it's a very subtle way to be able to see the time. And so the fact that the original one dimmed until you went, was really, really not a great experience, and this is an order of magnitude better, right? And so the only time that the display is off is when it is off your wrist, when it's charging, actually, which is kind of frustrating, right? You might want to clock there. So there's that. And then finally, on the good side, there is a ton of other functionality here. You can make phone calls. You can send pre-done texts. You can do follow-up texts. You can use applications, right? If I go into this, I can see all of the various applications I got installed left and right on my freaking phone, and as a result, you see all sorts of stuff that has apps for it. And so you can use any of those various things. You could pull up your freaking Starbucks card if you feel like paying too much money for coffee or something like that. There are lots of approaches here. You can do a bunch of stuff with this watch that you could never do with a more conventional watch, and that is something you want to keep in mind. So to me, all of that is the good, is that there's a ton of functionality here. It has an always-on display, which is a real game changer there. It is generally a very lightweight watch. You get Apple Pay on the wrist. It makes Face ID suck a little bit less. Ecosystem bonuses are a thing. Silent alarms are a beautiful thing. You get silent important notifications, which can be really useful for some folks. They have some nice strap options, including this Milanese loop that is great. On the great side, though, for me, is actually the data that you get from this. This is a watch that will tell you all sorts of things. So one of them is heart rate. If you put this guy on your wrist, you can have it consistently, and it will consistently in the background be giving your heart rate. And so you can see here that I am animatedly gesturing, and as a result, my heart rate is a little bit higher than normal. Oh, see, hey, look, you can see how my heart rate changed when I woke up. Heart rate's a little high. I'm working on that one. But nonetheless, you can do that. You can actually do a full-on EKG by putting your finger on here to detect certain kinds of arrhythmia. You can get a pulse oximetry reading to get a sense of your blood oxygen level. You can tell that there's been an exercise, and in this case, I haven't been wearing the watch all day, so there's not a lot of exercise going on here. You can get, like, workout statistics. You can even measure the noise in the room that you are in at a given moment, which actually can be very useful if you are in a situation where, for instance, you are in a factory floor or you're working in a loud restaurant. It's very easy to get to levels of noise that are much higher than what's advisable, that can actually cause long-term hearing damage, and this can help to clue you into those kinds of things. Honestly, the very best part of this is all of the various pieces of data that you get off of this. Even sleep data. It tells you, how long were you asleep, were you tossing, turning, it measures your blood and your breathing over it's kind of cool, right? And so to me, the data is the most compelling part of this. I am a data-focused guy, and I love the fact that this is able to collect interesting data that I really can't get anywhere else. And I wish they kind of offered a module that did that without pretending to be a watch, just like put it around my freaking leg or something, and capture all that still. But you know what? This is pretty cool. That, to me, is the greatest part of this, and that's the thing that makes this completely unique from any other device in my life, right? My phone can do a bunch of stuff, but it can't do that because, well, it's not up against my wrist all day. So to me, that's what's great, is a constant stream of interesting data about your daily life and your health. The bad side, I know a lot of you are thinking right now, Nick, oh my God, that's a lot of data. And You know what? You're right, 100%. Do we really want Apple to have this much data about us? There's a lot of trust required to believe that they're not selling that data, and I'm honestly not 100% sure I do believe that, right? Apple has had some massive privacy missteps of late, and that's putting it pretty charitably. And even if you trust Apple right now, all it takes is some new MBA who needs to goose the stock price a little bit to sell all that data to somebody else. There is a lot of benefit to having this data for you and maybe for your doctor more than anything, but at the same time, there can be a lot of harm in other people having this data, and especially when the people who have the data serve the shareholders rather than the consumers. You should always be a little bit wary of that. And so realize that until big tech companies work for the consumer, not the stock price, there is a big trade-off in giving them anything like that, and that is something you want to keep in mind before you make this choice. I know for a lot of people that's a very scary idea, and honestly, for me it is too. But there's also the benefit, right, of being able to, see, what is my heart rate? It is a little higher than it should be. Something like that. Next thing, this is not a computer that you own. Speaking of Apple doing weird things, unfortunately, although you buy it, right, and it is a computer, there's no way to run your own code without creating an Apple Watch app and doing all the signing stuff. Many of the features and the APIs are not available to you. You cannot change the OS. It won't work as well with Android phones. So it kind of keeps you locked into the platform there. And open source can't be a thing. Apple has specific guidelines that mean that open source software really struggles to be in the App Store. Right? And so if I could, and the thing is, it would be really nice if I could interact this with other parts of my life. If I could press a button on the watch face that would run a shell script on my Mac or my Linux box, that would be stellar. The thing is, that is so far off the menu. Apple wants this to be locked down. They want this to be running applications that they approve. And honestly, it's a reminder that Apple is the administrator. You are the user. And they're letting you log into and use this device on their terms for now. And I really dislike that, right? As a guy who really likes open software, generally speaking, and acknowledges that right now there's not a great place to go for the phone. Yes, Android people, I know about Lineage OS. I know about all that stuff, but usability. I need a phone more than I need principles right now. But at the same time, that is a downside, and I really dislike having another walled garden in my life. Speaking of Apple trying to control you, it feels like they're steering you in purchasing, right? This right here is the black aluminum model, and this is the graphite Milanese loop bracelet. And you know what? That's great. And it has worked very well, and it's actually reasonably attractive as a watch. But the thing is, what I actually wanted was a silver watch, right, with a nice silver Milanese loop and a silver watch. The thing is, though, to do that, they don't sell this in a silver. They don't sell a silver aluminum enclosure. I'd like to remind you that aluminum is silver, right? You can get plain metal aluminum. They have aluminum in other kind of colors. They've got one that's got kind of a goldish, rosy tone to it that's almost silver, but paired with the bracelet look terrible. Instead, if you want a silver watch, they are directing you to the steel of the titanium. The thing is, both of those are very heavy and very, well, okay, titanium is not very heavy, but the steel is much heavier, and the titanium is much more expensive. And to me, the fact that they weren't willing to offer a silver aluminum feels pretty transparently like they're just trying to push me up the line, right? They're trying to force an upgrade to people who want something that looks a little bit more like an adult watch. And to be fair, I get why the MBAs involved with this would do it. They're product segmenting based on the aesthetic of it, right? But that's not something that's ideal. Don't make me choose a product I'm going to like less in order to get a particular style. And actually, speaking of that, there are a couple of weird little gaps in accessory availability, right? So, for instance, the Solo Loop, this little guy, they don't offer it in black, which is bizarre. They offer the watch in black, but they don't offer the Solo Loop in black. And so as a result, this is the least toy-like of the colorations, but none of them really super appealed to me. And that's why I'm wearing a steel bracelet on an aluminum watch that it doesn't quite match. Right? So that was just very, very, very strange. And by the way, there was also weird gaps in what you can try on. I went to an actual Apple store to try this guy on to get a sense of what was going on. They didn't even have the bracelet in stock to try on. And, you know, again, I'm sure all of this makes a lot of sense for making people spend more money, but it just felt vaguely hostile and dark patterny to me. Next thing, this can be very much an information leak, right? If you have this guy on your wrist, for instance, there are watch faces that will actually put, for instance, your next calendar event on there. And in fact, if you just click, for instance, this guy, it'll show you what your next event is and things like that. And there are many of the watch faces, those things will just pop up, right? You'll look down at your wrist and it's telling you what your next calendar event is. And in some cases, you know, that's completely fine, but in other cases, it might be an actual problem, right? I'm not a big fan of the information leaking that can happen there. And so if your schedule is something that you consider to be relatively private, well, A, should you be keeping it in iCloud or in Google Calendar or anything else like that? That's a question. But B, this is something that's very likely to tell people what your next appointment is, even if you might not have naturally done so. So that is something you want to keep in mind. Also, for a tabletop reviewer, it is super weird, right? Because I could be, you know, just reviewing a pocket knife, have this on my wrist, and suddenly it's showing him a text message from my wife, right? It's a little thing, but it's like you're one notification away from being doxxed. So it's a little detail, but there is one benefit to the watch showing me the time and nothing else. I never have to worry that this watch is going to say something to somebody that leaks information that I don't need them to have, right? So that is kind of a thing you want to keep in mind. Next thing about this guy is, unfortunately, it has a tendency to not be a watch. What I mean by that is, for instance, I will often, you know, watch a YouTube video while I'm walking from place to place, or more importantly, have the audio on, or I'll be listening to music or something like that. But the problem is, when you do that, you end up getting a music control screen where you get, you know, this, and this, like play, pause, etc. It's hard to do this, by the way, because my phone is doing the filming. But nonetheless, you will get a screen that allows you to do that. The thing is, you look down, and although the time is displayed in the top corner there, all the other stuff that you might want to see is not. And so it's like, dude, you're supposed to be a watch. Similarly, if I'm biking, you know, I look down and it says, hey, I think you're starting a bike workout. And I'm like, well, yeah, thank you, but I'm trying to figure out if I'm running late, right? That's a detail, right? So a watch is always just being a watch, but this guy is occasionally a little bit too smart for its own good, and it tries to do other things. Next thing, the screen on this guy is actually a little bit too bright overnight, right? This is something where, you know, I'm used to watches that have lume, right? And I hear a lot of people who may not be familiar with actual watches saying, oh, well, at least you can read it overnight. Thing is, you can read this overnight too. I just charge the lume with a flashlight, and this will last all night long. Thing is, so will this, but it's just a lot brighter. You look at it, it's like, my eyes, right? It's not something amazing. I kind of wish that they had a night watch face that didn't screw with your night vision quite as much. Maybe they do. I just didn't find it, but this was a little bit strong overnight. Next thing, this does have water resistance, right? This is, I think, rated for 50 meters. Basically, you can swim with it, but in order to swim with it, you need to start a swim workout so that it can lock out the watch face, because remember, the watch face itself is sensitive to water. If I drip water on there, it's going to think that I'm touching it, right? And it can also apparently negatively impact the altimeter afterwards. They say you can swim a shower with it, but, you know, in practice, compared to something that has 300 meters worth of water resistance and rubber seals keeping everything out, otherwise it being a sealed piece of metal, this is not going to be as nice. So, yeah, you can definitely do better than with the early generations, but the water resistance on this guy is still and more importantly, it has some serious usability issues given that the touchscreen thinks water is touching. Next thing, this is very expensive as tech, although I gotta say it is cheap as a watch. This is $450 as configured right here on the table. If you throw in this guy, you add a little bit more money. I wouldn't throw in this guy necessarily. Whatever, your call. And of course, it can go way up from there. As you go up to titanium, you're looking at $800. You know, you can go on their website and configure it for you. But this was $450. And the thing is, that's a good chunk of change, right? That's not the amount of money I'm willing to pay for sort of the disposable electronic tool necessarily, right? If it's something I use all the damn time, like a phone, I can see that, but this feels a little bit much. Mind you, that's a little bit hypocritical because very often I look at much more expensive. This wristwatch here, yeah, it's closer to $6,500. But the thing is, when you spend that much money on a watch, you can make it last decades. If you spend that much money on this, you're on borrowed time. And so especially when you get into the $800 titanium version or the $1,800 Burberry or whatever versions with the designer, I'm not buying it. Next thing, this can be very, very distracting, right? Because as this guy is on your wrist, it's going to be playing notifications. It's going to be doing things that demand your attention. And mind you, you can, of course, control this, right? Most of the time, it's just going to sit there and be a thing, but apps can trigger notifications, right? It's a good idea, by the way, just in general purpose, whether you get one of these or otherwise, disable as many notifications as you can, right? Because that just makes your life better. By default, if an app asks for notifications, my answer is no. You have to earn that privilege, right? But, you know, very often you will get apps that need notifications for things, but then they'll send a, hey, we're having a sale kind of thing. It's like, you jerk. And usually they get the notification muzzle at that moment. But the thing is, this will notify you. Sometimes it's for things you care about, like, for instance, text messages. And you can configure, again, exactly the settings you want, what notifies and what not. But still, it does its own notifications. Like, it may tell me at some point here to stand up. And to be fair, I probably should stand up. I've been sitting a lot. But at the same time, if I'm just in the middle of, if I'm in a flow state doing something at work, and my watch is suddenly, hey, stand up, jackass, or take a mindful moment, it asked me at one point in time, like, dude, nah, I'm sorry, not my scene. So the distraction factor is very much there, and this can lead to notification hypervigilance. Like I said, it can be very good to have a good sense of, you know, what's going on in life and to get notified about the things that really matter. But it can also be a little bit unpleasant mental health-wise to be bouncing from notification to notification. Smartwatches can be a double-edged sword, and even configure as I have, so it really doesn't ping me much. That's still a distraction, especially if you really need to be on focus on something going on in the world. Next thing, the solo loop on this guy. I tried this guy out, and the thing is, not only am I not a big fan of the looks, it looks very kiddie. It looks very much like, you know, well, it just doesn't really look like a watch in my estimation. Maybe at best it looks like some kind of a Casio affair, right? But there's that, but it's also not super pleasant to put on, because in order for it to be tight against your wrist, you need this to be relatively tight against your wrist, and so you're stretching this guy to get it onto your wrist each time, and I don't know, it just didn't, I tried it in the store, it's like, hey, that's pretty cool, that works, and it doesn't have the awkward crown, it's very, very thin, it's very, very light, but at the same time, in practice, I put this guy on, and I probably took it off 4 or 5 hours later. Just wasn't a big fan of it, it's always just a little bit tight, right? So, I don't know, I'm not a big fan of the solo loop, this didn't turn out to be something I preferred, the Milanese is much better to me. Then finally, on the bad side, this guy uses a proprietary charging cable. It's this little guy right here. So in order to charge this watch, what you need to do is you take it off your wrist, which I'm going to do yet again here. Again, no Siri, I'm not talking to you at the moment, but thank you. You can, by the way, talk to Siri on this bad boy, but don't know why you'd need to. But anyways, you plug this little guy in, and then this just attaches basically to the back of the watch, onto that little crown back there, and then it charges the watch. It does some kind of magnetic inductive charging. That is how it charges the watch. That is the only way that this watch charges. The problem with that is, what this means is you have another cable in your life, right? Let's say you're traveling. You need to make sure that you bring not only your phone cable, which is Lightning, because Apple can't embrace USB-C, except when they do, but you also might need a USB-C cable, you need a USB-C adapter, as well as your Apple Watch cable, because you cannot charge this guy without this cable. That's the thing. And so I get that fitting a USB-C plug into this might have been hard, or it stole a little bit of, space in there for it. But the thing is, even making the side of this thing be USB-C, so I just need to carry this little bit and then plug in a USB-C cable, that would have been better, right? But I know that they make more money selling these cables, so of course they want to sell a bunch of these to have one at work, one at home, etc. But it's just freaking annoying. I'm tired of proprietary cables in my life. There are standards. Apple, why do you hate us? Then finally, to me, all of that is the bad. That it has a proprietary charging cable, which is yet another proprietary cable in my life from Apple. Thank you guys very much. This is why we can't have nice things. The solo loop does look very Casio. It has the notification hypervigilance thing becomes a thing. You get a lot of distraction from it. It is very expensive as tech, even if it is pretty cheap for a watch. The water resistance is sort of so-so. The screen is a little bright overnight. It is very regularly not trying to be a watch because it's trying to be smarter than that. There are weird gaps in accessibility, accessory availability. Can't get things in the colors you want. It is a major information leak, potentially. The watch faces are very much Apple controlled. Oh, I think I forgot to mention that, but this is the most attractive face I could find. They've got a bunch of different options, but you can't really choose exactly what you're looking to do here, right? You can't customize it quite as much as I want. And a lot of times sometimes the hands were really hard to read. So it'd be nice to just be able to do, scripts and such. I don't know. But anyways, the watch faces are very Apple-controlled. Apple is still trying to control you in purchasing by not offering this guy in silver. It's not a computer that you actually own, and the data collection is very interesting but very scary. On the ugly front, there are two ugly issues here. The first one is this right here. This is the battery indicator. What we see here is this guy has been unplugged for about, well, okay, you can tell what time it is. It's 1:32. This guy I unplugged around 9 a.m. And already we're at 86% battery. And given I've been using it a fair amount here in the run-up for the review, but you aren't going to be charging this watch every single day. Every day that I wore this guy, I ended up with around 25 or 30% battery when I woke up, basically. By the end of a 24-hour period, I was down to about 25%. And it takes about 45 minutes to an hour charging it with the proprietary cable plugged into a really high-quality USB-C adapter. And that's not great, right? That means you get maybe 25 to 30 hours of battery life. And there are ways to control your battery life a little bit more, but still, that's not great. If you're in a situation where you're traveling for a long stretch of time, now you have to take time to charge your watch too. I dislike that. And for me, a watch should be a 24/7 companion, right? This should be a thing that works for you all the time and is with you all the time, and this is not, right? And this will get worse as the watch ages, as the battery drops in capacity, as the software gets more bloated. This is not going to ever be better than this, and I really don't appreciate that. But one thing I will say, though, this is the first time battery life is manageable on an Apple Watch. I can wear this guy overnight without any concern. Right? And if you take it off first thing in the morning and you put it on the charger, then by the time you're leaving for work, you will have a charged watch. That is nice. 45 minutes to an hour ain't so bad. Wearing it 23 hours a day isn't so different than wearing it 24. But at the same time, even during that time period, it's just like, wait, am I running late? What's going on here? And the experience is just way worse than a mechanical watch or a quartz watch or the Pebble watches that predate it by many, many years that ran for 2 weeks on a charge, right? So I really don't care for that. The charging every day thing is a little detail, right? It's not the end of any world, but it is a pain in the neck. And constantly thinking, okay, is my watch going to run out of battery? As opposed to this guy where it's like, yeah, I need to service this in like 4 or 5 years. Okay, we got it. We're good. Mind you, this, if I take it off the wrist, this will wind down, but then I just wind it back up again, and that just takes my fingers doing this for 30 seconds. Guys, it's a problem. Then the other ugly issue is that this will be e-waste at a point that is not so far in the future, right? Because this is a watch that is not serviceable except by Apple. And it has parts in it that will die. The battery will die in it, right? That is the nature of batteries. After a while, it will cease to have the same amount of capacity, and already the capacity isn't that amazing. More importantly, apps will move on after a while. Your phone will stop talking to old versions, right? You know, they're going to want Bluetooth 18.0, and this is only what I mean, it probably won't be long-term supported past a certain point because technology will move on and leave it behind. In theory, somebody could take this watch, and in 40 years, they could make it run like new. They could do a service on it, and then they could wear it for another 40 years. This has staying power because it is a simple mechanical object. It doesn't need, well, not simple, but it is a mechanical object. It doesn't rely on software. It doesn't rely on a manufacturer supporting it. Whereas this guy, I suspect, will have all the functionality of a 10-year-old cell phone in 10 years, which is very, very, very little, if any at all. It's worth noting, of course, that this is a little disingenuous, because you could buy a new Apple Watch every 5 years and still not come anywhere near the price of this Omega here. But the fact is, you can buy a quartz watch that will last for, you know, many, many, many years with capacitor switches for less than the price of this guy. That's not a great thing. And I just don't love the optics of disposable goods. And remember, the other thing to keep in mind with something like this is that their stock price goes up when you throw it away and buy a new one. So every incentive is against them going the extra mile to make it last longer. I'm hoping that Apple will do the right thing and support these, do the green thing, do the ecologically friendly thing, and support their hardware over a long time. And to be fair, Apple is generally better about this than, for instance, the Android makers. But at the same time, I really dislike the idea of paying a lot of money for something that won't last by definition. So to me, that's the ugly, is that this has a ticking clock on it, so to speak, and I don't mean the watch face, and it is charging every single day and for a non-trivial amount of time. Final conclusion. Look, this is the best Apple Watch yet, right? They have done a really nice job with a nice bracelet here, good strap options more generally, good notifications, haptics, silent alarms, good interactions with the rest of the ecosystem. It makes Face ID suck less. It's pretty lightweight. It's got an always-on display, a bunch of functionality, and it's able to collect a bunch of data that could be useful to you or potentially to your doctor. Mind you, that data could also be useful to people trying to sell you ads or raise your insurance premiums. It is another walled garden. Having information just available on your wrist can leak information. Apple has made weird product segmentation decisions with aesthetics and things like that. There are weird gaps in their lineup in terms of accessories and things like that. It is trying very regularly to be smart at the cost of not being much of a watch. The screen is a little bright overnight. The water resistance is, it can be very distracting. You're choosing Apple's watch faces, not your own, really. The solo loop doesn't look super duper adult to me. The charger cable is very proprietary and you're going to need it every damn day, and it has a limited lifetime, and Apple has all the incentives in the world to reduce that lifetime where it can. My final conclusion is sort of mixed, right? Because, okay, at some level, I can see the folks who do love a smartwatch loving this, right? Because it is clear to me that Apple has finally got the tech to a place where it is mostly working well. This is as polished an experience as I would need, and getting the fitness and health data was genuinely a nice thing, and I'm sure if I really leaned into it, there would be more joy to find here. In my test, I've been looking mostly at the apps I already use, but I imagine I could find other apps that are going to make things a little bit more interesting and do things a little bit different that could make this more compelling, right? And a lot of folks have worked hard to do that. But the thing is, and to be fair, if somebody said to me, like, Nick, you are a smartwatch person now. We have taken away all of your watches. This is what you have to wear. You are wearing an Apple Watch. For the first time, I could do this, right? For the first time since the Pebble Steel, I could wear this as my daily watch and I could be fine, right? The always-on makes it an experience that is perhaps not ideal in every circumstance, but is predominantly good. And the battery life and charge times make it workable within my life, even if it's not preferable. And it feels polished enough that although it annoys me in some places, it's not a real bad product if smartwatch is a thing that makes sense to you, right? And so I could see a smartwatch being a part of my life, and if for some reason I couldn't wear regular watches anymore, I could do this. I probably would end up upgrading, spending a little bit more money to get something that's a little bit more aesthetically up my alley, maybe, but at the same time, I could do it. It is a fine piece in that way. That said, after a few days of wearing this, after my review period, so to speak, I'm done. I'm good. I'm all set. Because I realize this isn't an experience that I want. It is closer than ever, and maybe within a few more generations it will be, but we're just not there yet. Because although I appreciate some of the smartness, for sure, you know, the alarms, the timers, volume controls for device in your pocket, Apple Pay, seeing text messages at a glance, being able to, oh, you know, what's my next thing? Oh, yeah, gotta call Metal Complex's simp. Great, okay. I love Metal Complex, by the way. It's a thing. We know this. But anyways, I can figure out my next appointment. There's a lot of smart stuff that's good here. And having the health data, having the exercise data, that's great. But I don't use a lot of the smartness, right? I'm a person who tries to minimize notifications rather than maximize them. I couldn't, or I wouldn't necessarily go biking or running without a phone. That would be silly to me. So, you know, getting a cellular one that I can make phone calls from like Dick freaking Tracy, that's not my scene. And the thing is, I tend to have very specialized ways of interacting with tech that I can't port into a device that I don't own here, right? I can't, you know, I can't write a bash shell script to do stuff on this. And that's the way I like to work with my tech, right? That's not the level of control I have, and that bothers me. And more importantly, I don't think it's worth the sacrifices required to get that smart, right? If this were a more open device, and I wasn't in vendor lock-in world, I wasn't putting up with Apple's hyper-control of the system, that would be nice. But also the constant charging, you know, having to do that every morning for a full hour, like, not a thing, right? If I was charging it, you know, a half an hour a day, or, you know, an hour every few days, I could work that. But this is a little bit much. It's a little annoying. But more importantly, the fact that I can't count on this being around and useful for 10 years, let alone 100, that bothers me in a very real way. And to me, I think the biggest argument I have against a smartwatch is the same one that most people actually have against a regular watch, which is, dude, you're carrying a phone. Why bother? And, you know, for me, the convenience of having the time always on my wrist at a glance is great. Right? It is an order of magnitude faster and more subtle to check the time if you're in a meeting talking with somebody by glancing down at your wrist rather than pulling your phone out of your pocket. right? That is a very, very nice thing, and it can be more subtle, and it feels less like, dude, I'm waiting, I'm trying to get out of here. There are very good benefits to having a watch on your wrist at a given moment, right? But honestly, the fact that I have my phone in my pocket all the time is kind of defeating the purpose of this, because it is a far smarter device, right? My phone is better at doing everything that this does, with the exception of gathering the health data, which my phone literally cannot do. And for the most part, doing something on the watch, opening up the app, okay, I gotta go to Spotify, whatever, that takes just as long as doing it on the phone, right? If not even longer, and it's a little more cumbersome because I'm using a little tiny touchscreen here. There are very few things that are faster to do on the watch than on the phone, and that's not a great thing. So in practice, by wearing this guy, I'm not really saving much time. And ultimately, I just kind of felt like, well, I could have done that on my phone, and I could have had something that was better as a watch on my wrist. And so ultimately, I kind of feel like I started this experiment actually feeling like, this is pretty nice. This is a big improvement. And it was, to be fair, relative to the first Apple Watch, this is an order of magnitude better. They have done so many things. The first one I was tired of after a little while. I fought that battle hard, but I couldn't do it. This one, I could do. I don't want to, but I could. But I was thinking, at first, God, is this really, really good? Am I going to get out of watches? And I'm a high-tech guy, and my watches are kind of anachronistic, which is hilarious because they're chronometers, but I digress. I wondered whether bringing the latest tech into my ADC would be a win for me, for my life, but today I end this experiment with no ambiguity at all. I would rather carry a phone and wear a watch that excels at being a watch rather than carry a phone and wear a watch that also wants to be a phone while also not being a great watch or being a great phone. That's the choice that I'm making here. And so I would rather carry a great watch and carry a good phone than carry a bad watch and a good phone. Right? To me, that's the thing. So I freely acknowledge that somebody else could very easily fall head over heels in love with this guy. If you love the smartwatch thing, if that's your scene, then absolutely for you, this could be the best smartwatch ever. It might even feel like a gem, and you're welcome to call me biased. Disregard me entirely. But for me, ultimately, wearing this smartwatch was not the smartest choice. There you go. Hope this has been interesting to you, and I'm heading back to regular watches in about 5 minutes here, and hope this has been interesting. Have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.